She lent him money to go back home, not imagining that he was a millionaire. The next day, 5 men in suits were waiting for him at the entrance of work. Sarah Matthews pulled down the metal shutters of Style and Grace, the boutique where she had worked for the past 15 years. The mall's usual bustle had died down, with only a few stragglers hurrying past the darkened storefronts. Her feet ached after another long day of standing, but she couldn't complain. This job had been her lifeline since James left, leaving her to raise their 2 children alone. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to lock up, a gentle knock on the glass door caught her attention. A man in his early 50s, dressed in a simple but neat button-down shirt and khakis, gestured apologetically. Sarah hesitated. She had already closed the register, and Karen, her manager, had strict rules about after-hours customers. But something in the man's polite demeanor made her unlock the door. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "I know you're closing, but I desperately need a suit for a meeting tomorrow morning. I saw some nice options through the window." Sarah glanced at her watch. Her daughter Emily would be waiting for her to help with college applications, but she couldn't turn away someone in need. "Come in, but we'll need to be quick," she said, holding the door open. The man, who introduced himself as Robert, moved efficiently through the racks, selecting a charcoal grey suit that Sarah noted would complement his silver-streaked hair perfectly. In the fitting room, he tried it on with minimal fuss, and the suit seemed tailored for him. "This is exactly what I needed," Robert smiled, emerging from the fitting room. But when he reached for his wallet at the counter, his expression changed to one of distress. "Oh no," he muttered, patting his pockets frantically. "My wallet, I must have left it on the bus, or—" He paled slightly. "I think someone might have taken it." Sarah watched as he pulled out his phone, dialing his bank. After a brief conversation, his shoulders slumped. "My cards have been used at several locations in the past hour. They're all blocked now, but—" He looked at Sarah with genuine embarrassment. "I live in Maplewood Heights, that's quite a distance. I don't even have enough for the bus fare." Sarah felt a familiar tugging at her heart. The same feeling she had when her son Tommy came home with torn school books, or when Emily needed new dance shoes for her recital. Life had taught her that sometimes a little kindness could make all the difference. "How much do you need for the bus?" she asked, reaching for her purse. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly—" Robert began, but Sarah was already counting out bills. "Take this," she said, pressing $40 into his hand. "It's enough for the fare and a meal if you need it. You can return tomorrow with your new cards and settle everything." Robert's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "You don't know how much this means," he said softly. "I promise I'll be back first thing tomorrow." As Sarah watched him hurry away through the nearly empty mall, she thought about Karen's reaction if she ever found out about this unorthodox arrangement. But something about the entire interaction felt right, despite its unusual nature. She gathered her things, finally locking up for real this time, unaware that this simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would transform not just her life, but the lives of countless others. Walking to her car in the dim parking lot, Sarah pulled out her phone to call Emily, mentally preparing herself for another evening of balancing her daughter's college dreams with their financial reality. The cool evening air carried the scent of approaching autumn, and somewhere in the distance, a clock tower chimed 9 times, marking not just the hour, but the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in Sarah Matthews' ordinary life. The next morning arrived with an unexpected chill in the air. Sarah pulled into her usual parking spot 30 minutes before the mall's opening time, sipping coffee from her travel mug as she reviewed the day's sales targets. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and she was so absorbed in her paperwork that she almost missed the unusual sight before her. 5 men in impeccably tailored suits stood near the boutique's entrance. Their presence was striking, not just because of their formal attire at this early hour, but because of the way they carried themselves with quiet authority. For a moment, Sarah wondered if they might be corporate auditors, and her heart rate quickened as she thought of the unorthodox transaction from the previous evening. As she approached, one of the men stepped forward. He was tall, with distinguished grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the morning light. "Ms. Matthews?" he inquired, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed at odds with his formal appearance. "I'm Theodore Wells, Chief Operations Officer for Milestone Enterprises." Sarah nodded cautiously, her keys clutched tightly in her hand. The man continued, "We're here on behalf of Robert Sterling." The name didn't register immediately until he added, "The gentleman you assisted last evening." "Oh," Sarah replied, her voice small. "Is everything all right? He promised to return today to settle the payment." A slight smile crossed Theodore's face. "Ms. Matthews, what you don't know is that Robert Sterling is the founder and CEO of Milestone Enterprises, one of the largest retail development companies in the Northeast. And yesterday's encounter was not exactly coincidental." Sarah's mind raced as Theodore explained that Robert Sterling had a unique approach to finding key personnel for his organization. He deliberately placed himself in situations where he could observe people's natural reactions, believing that genuine character revealed itself in unguarded moments. "Mr. Sterling was deeply impressed by your kindness," Theodore continued. "Not just the act itself, but the way you handled the situation with dignity and discretion. We've been looking for someone to manage our new luxury boutique division, and he believes you would be perfect for the role." Sarah's coffee had grown cold in her hands as she listened. The offer seemed surreal, a management position in a luxury retail chain. It was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about but never thought possible, especially since her separation from James had forced her to put her own ambitions on hold. She began searching for words. "This is very flattering, but it seems too good to be true. I mean, I'm just a sales associate." "You're underselling yourself," another of the men interjected kindly. "We've reviewed your record here. 15 years of consistent performance, the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the mall, and an intuitive understanding of both fashion and people. These are exactly the qualities we need." Theodore handed her a business card made of thick cream-colored stock. "We'd like you to visit our headquarters this afternoon. Mr. Sterling would like to discuss the opportunity with you personally." As if sensing her hesitation, he added, "We understand this is unexpected. Take the morning to think it over. The car will be here at 2 o'clock if you decide to join us." The men departed as smoothly as they had appeared, leaving Sarah standing, alone in the growing morning light. Through the boutique's windows, she could see Karen arriving, fumbling with her own set of keys. The familiar sight of her manager's disapproving frown brought Sarah back to reality. But for the first time in years, that reality seemed less like a prison and more like a chrysalis on the verge of breaking open. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the entrance. In just a few hours, she would have to make a decision that could change everything. But for now, she had a store to open, customers to serve, and a morning to spend pondering the extraordinary possibility that sometimes fairy tales might just come true in the most unexpected ways. The Milestone Enterprises headquarters stood like a gleaming monument of glass and steel against the afternoon sky. Sarah sat in the back of the sleek black car that had picked her up precisely at 2 o'clock, her heart pounding as they pulled into the underground parking garage. Her decision to come hadn't been easy. Karen had practically sneered when she requested the afternoon off, making a pointed comment about some people thinking they were too good for their positions. The elevator rode smoothly to the 42nd floor where Theodore Wells waited to greet her. The office suite was a study in understated elegance, with warm wooden panels and soft lighting that made Sarah feel simultaneously impressed and uncomfortable in her simple department store outfit. "Mr. Sterling is looking forward to meeting you properly," Theodore said, leading her through a series of corridors. They passed what looked like a design studio, where young professionals were examining fabric swatches and digital displays showing clothing designs. Sarah couldn't help but slow down, her experienced eye catching details of the upcoming season's trends. "Impressive, isn't it?" A familiar voice made her turn. Robert Sterling, no longer in the simple attire from the previous evening, stood in a doorway wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Yet his warm smile was exactly the same. "Please, come in," He gestured to a comfortable sitting area in his office, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. "I owe you both an apology and an explanation." Over the next hour, Robert shared his philosophy about business and people. He explained how his grandmother's story of being helped by a stranger during hard times had shaped his approach to finding the right people for his company. "Money can buy skills and qualifications," he said, pouring Sarah a cup of tea. "But it can't buy genuine kindness, integrity, or intuition. Those qualities have to come naturally." Sarah listened, still somewhat skeptical. "But why me? Surely there are hundreds of more qualified people." "Are there?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, how did you know I was telling the truth last night, that I wasn't trying to scam you?" The question caught Sarah off guard. I suppose I didn't know for certain, but something in your eyes." She paused, remembering. "You weren't just embarrassed about the money. You were worried about something bigger, probably that meeting you mentioned. The details mattered to you in a way that wouldn't matter to someone trying to deceive." Robert's smile widened. "That's exactly the kind of insight we need. Our new boutique chain, Luminous, isn't just about selling luxury clothes. It's about creating an experience, understanding people, and building genuine connections." He stood and walked to a large screen on the wall, pulling up images of stunning boutique interiors. "We're opening 5 stores in the next 6 months. Each one will cater to a different demographic, but all will share one common philosophy. Authentic luxury isn't about price tags, it's about making people feel valued." Sarah found herself drawn into the concept, her mind already racing with ideas. "Like having private styling sessions for working mothers who can't shop during regular hours," she suggested, thinking of her own challenges. "Exactly." Robert's enthusiasm was contagious. "Or partnering with local artists to create unique displays, building community connections." As they discussed possibilities, Sarah felt her initial skepticism melting away. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an opportunity to create something meaningful. But then a thought struck her. "My children," she said quietly. "I'm a single mother. This kind of position would require longer hours, more responsibility, which is why the position comes with flexible hours and the ability to work remotely when needed," Robert interjected. "We believe in supporting our employees' whole lives, not just their work lives." The salary he mentioned next nearly made Sarah drop her teacup. It was more than enough to pay for Emily's college tuition and still set aside savings for Tommy's education. But it wasn't just the money that made her pulse race. It was the challenge, the opportunity to prove herself. "I'd like to accept," she said finally, her voice firm despite her internal trembling. "But I need to be clear about something. I won't compromise my principles for business. If I see something wrong, I'll speak up." Robert's expression grew serious. "I wouldn't want it any other way. In fact, that's exactly why we need you." He extended his hand. "Welcome to Milestone Enterprises, Sarah." As they shook hands, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this opportunity than met the eye. But for now, she allowed herself to embrace the moment, imagining the look on Emily's face when she shared the news. News of Sarah's promotion spread through the mall like wildfire. Karen, her former manager, didn't even try to hide her disdain. As she processed Sarah's resignation, "I suppose some people just get lucky," she said acidly, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the desk. "Though I can't help but wonder what exactly happened during that after-hours visit." The insinuation stung, but Sarah held her head high. She knew the truth, even if others chose to believe rumors. Besides, she had more pressing concerns, like her first major presentation to the Milestone Board of Directors next week. At home, the transition wasn't going smoothly either. Tommy, her 14-year-old son, had been unusually quiet since she'd started her new position. One evening, as Sarah reviewed store design proposals on her laptop, she caught him staring at her from the doorway of her home office. "Remember when we used to watch movies on Wednesday nights?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "Now you're always working." The comment hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on proving herself worthy of this opportunity that she'd missed the signs of her son's growing resentment. "Tommy," she began, closing her laptop, "come sit with me." But he was already walking away, the sound of his bedroom door closing echoing through the house. Emily, ever the practical one, appeared with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "He'll come around, Mom," she said, sitting beside Sarah. "He just needs time to adjust. We all do." The next morning, Sarah arrived early at Milestone's headquarters for her daily briefing with Theodore. As they reviewed the progress on the first store location, she noticed something odd about one of the 5 executives who had visited her that first morning. James Chen, the company's head of security, seemed to be everywhere she went, always in the background, always watching. "Is everything all right?" Theodore asked, noticing her distraction. "Yes, Sarah hesitated. "I've noticed Mr. Chen seems to pay particular attention to my activities." Theodore's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "James is very thorough in his duties. Security is a top priority for any luxury retail operation." The answer seemed reasonable, but it didn't quite explain the way James had been photographing her conversations with contractors, or how he'd been spotted near her house one evening when she was working late. Sarah's concerns were temporarily pushed aside by an urgent call from the construction supervisor at the first store location. Their primary supplier for the custom lighting fixtures had suddenly backed out, citing unforeseen circumstances. Without those fixtures, designed specifically for their unique display concept, the entire store opening could be delayed. "How long do we have to find a replacement?" Sarah asked, already pulling up her contacts from her years in retail. 3 weeks maximum, the supervisor replied, "but these aren't standard fixtures. They need to be handcrafted according to very specific designs." Sarah remembered a small, artisan collective she'd discovered years ago during a trip to a crafts fair. They specialized in unique lighting pieces, combining traditional techniques with modern design. She'd kept their business card, impressed by their work but unable to afford any pieces on her previous salary. Making a quick decision, she called the collective's leader, Marina Torres. "I remember your work," Sarah said after introducing herself. "Would your team be interested in a large-scale commercial project?" Marina's enthusiasm was palpable, but she was honest about their limitations. "We've never done anything this big before. We'd need to hire more artisans, get additional equipment. If I could secure advance funding and guaranteed contracts for future locations, would that help?" Sarah asked, her mind racing with possibilities. This could be more than just solving a supply problem. It could be an opportunity to support local artisans while creating truly unique pieces for the stores. By the end of the day, Sarah had prepared a comprehensive proposal for Robert Sterling, including detailed costings, training programs for new artisans, and a plan to feature the collective story as part of the store's brand narrative. As she made her final edits, an email notification popped up on her screen. It was from a local news station, requesting an interview about her rags to riches story and her role in Milestone's innovative new retail concept. Sarah stared at the request, her finger hovering over the delete button. She'd always preferred staying out of the spotlight, but maybe this was a chance to control the narrative, to show that success could come from hard work and genuine kindness rather than the unsavory implications Karen had been spreading. The television interview changed everything. Sarah had prepared carefully, choosing a sophisticated but approachable outfit from the new Luminous collection. She spoke honestly about her journey, sharing stories about balancing single motherhood with her career and her belief in the power of small acts of kindness. What she hadn't expected was the response. The segment aired during the evening news, and by morning social media was buzzing with her story. But it wasn't just her professional journey that caught people's attention. It was her mention of growing up in Riverside Heights, a community that had been devastated by flooding 2 decades ago. "Mom, you're trending," Emily exclaimed over breakfast, scrolling through her phone. "People are sharing old photos of Riverside Heights, talking about their connections to the community." Sarah's phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from old acquaintances and strangers alike, but one message stood out, an email from a man named Michael Crawford, who claimed to be her mother's cousin. "I recognized your maiden name, Parker," the email read. "I've been trying to track down our family members since the flood scattered everyone. There's something important we need to discuss about the old family property." Sarah stared at the email, memories flooding back. She'd been just a teenager when the floods came, forcing her family to relocate. In the chaos of evacuation and rebuilding their lives, many documents and family connections had been lost. The office, she found it hard to concentrate. The lighting fixture crisis had been solved. Marina's collective had produced stunning prototype designs that exceeded everyone's expectations. But now, Sarah's mind was occupied with thoughts of her past. "You seem distracted," Theodore observed during their afternoon meeting. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, then decided to be honest. "The interview has stirred up some unexpected connections to my past. People from my old community, family members I'd lost touch with." Theodore's expression remained carefully neutral, but she noticed him glancing at his phone. Minutes later, James Chen appeared in the doorway, ostensibly to discuss security arrangements for the store opening. That evening, as Sarah was leaving the office, she overheard a snippet of conversation between James and Theodore. "Need to contain any potential complications," James was saying, his voice low but intense. "Mr. Sterling's investment in the region." The words made Sarah pause. She knew Milestone was planning several developments, but they hadn't announced the locations yet. Could there be a connection to Riverside Heights? At home, she found Tommy surprisingly eager to talk. "I looked up Riverside Heights online," he said, showing her his tablet. "Did you know they're planning to redevelop the whole area? Some big company bought up most of the land." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She pulled up Michael Crawford's email again, reading it more carefully. He'd mentioned family property. Could it be significant to the redevelopment plans? She decided to meet with Michael, arranging to have coffee at a busy cafe near her office. He turned out to be a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, carrying a worn leather briefcase full of old documents. "Your grandfather was meticulous about keeping records," Michael explained, spreading out yellowed papers on the table. "These show the extent of the Parker family holdings in Riverside Heights, nearly 30 acres of prime land, including what used to be the town center." Sarah's hands trembled as she examined the documents. Property deeds, tax records, and family photographs painted a picture she'd never known existed. Her family had been prominent members of the community, owners of significant property that had been acquired by various development companies in the confusion following the natural disaster. "But why are you showing me this now?" Sarah asked. Michael's expression grew serious. "Because the land is about to be worth a fortune. The redevelopment project. Sarah, have you heard of Sterling Holdings?" The name hit her like a thunderbolt. Sterling Holdings, a subsidiary of Milestone Enterprises. The company she now worked for owned the land that might rightfully belong to her family. As she drove home that evening, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Had Robert Sterling known about this connection when he hired her? Was this why James Chen had been watching her so closely? The timing of everything, the chance encounter at the store, the job offer, the sudden interest in her background, seemed too perfect to be coincidental. Her phone buzzed with a message from Robert Sterling's office. He wanted to meet first thing tomorrow morning to discuss the upcoming store opening. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she had to make a decision. Should she confront him with what she'd learned or wait to understand more about the situation? As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed a sleek black car parked across the street. Through the gathering dusk, she could just make out James Chen's silhouette behind the wheel, watching her house with unwavering attention. Sarah barely slept that night, her mind churning with possibilities. By morning, she had made her decision. She would approach this situation the same way she approached everything in her life, with direct honesty. The morning sun was just touching the top of the Milestone building when she arrived. Robert's assistant showed her straight into his office, where she found not just Robert, but also Theodore Wells and, surprisingly, Marina Torres from the Artisan Collective. "Sarah, perfect timing," Robert greeted her warmly. Marina has been showing us some remarkable proposals for expanding the lighting project to all 5 store locations. Marina beamed, spreading out designs on Robert's desk. The pieces were stunning, each one incorporating elements of local architecture and culture into contemporary forms. But Sarah's attention was drawn to one design in particular, a series of hanging lights inspired by the old town square of Riverside Heights. "I hope you don't mind," Marina said, noticing Sarah's expression. "After your interview aired, I did some research on your hometown. The architecture there was so inspiring. Actually," Sarah took a deep breath, "Riverside Heights is exactly what I wanted to discuss this morning." She reached into her bag and pulled out the documents Michael had given her. "Mr. Sterling, I recently learned something that might complicate our working relationship." Robert's expression didn't change, but she noticed, Theodore shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Go on," Robert encouraged. "Sterling Holdings owns the land in Riverside Heights where the Parker family property once stood, my family's property." Sarah laid out the documents on the desk. "Property that was acquired under questionable circumstances after the natural disaster." The room fell silent. Marina looked between Sarah and Robert, clearly sensing the tension. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice gentle. "I was wondering when you would discover this connection." He pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. On it appeared plans for what looked like a massive community development project. "This is why I chose Riverside Heights for our next major development, not just because of the land value, but because of its history and the opportunity to right some past wrongs." The plans showed not just luxury retail spaces, but community centers, affordable housing, and green spaces. At the center was a restored version of the Old Town Square, reimagined as a cultural hub. "I've spent years tracking down the original families of Riverside Heights," Robert explained. "Many of the property transfers after the disaster were legally questionable. My plan isn't just to develop the land, it's to ensure that the original families receive proper compensation and have a stake in the community's future." Sarah felt her knees weaken slightly. "You knew? All along?" "I knew your family name, yes. But your kindness that night in the store, that was genuine, and so was my response to it. The position I offered you wasn't about the land, Sarah. It was about finding someone with both the skills and the heart to help build something meaningful." Marina, who had been quietly absorbing this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "This explains why you were so interested in incorporating local artisans and community elements into the store designs. You're not just building shops, you're rebuilding a community." "That's exactly right," Robert nodded. "And Sarah, I hope you'll be a key part of that process, not just as our retail director, but as someone who understands what Riverside Heights once meant to its people." Sarah looked at the plans again, seeing them with new eyes. The designs weren't just about profit. They were about restoration, about bringing life back to a community that had been scattered by disaster. She thought about Michael Crawford, about all the families who had lost their homes and their connections to each other. "I want to be part of this," she said firmly, "but I need complete transparency moving forward. No more secrets, no more surveillance." She glanced meaningfully at Theodore, thinking of James Chen's constant presence. Robert's face broke into a genuine smile. "Agreed. In fact, I have a proposal for you. How would you feel about taking charge of the community engagement aspect of the project? Your story has already started bringing people together. Imagine what we could do with a proper platform." As they began discussing possibilities, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The mystery that had been building around her position was finally clearing, revealing something far more meaningful than she had imagined. But even as she immersed herself in the plans, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if there were still pieces of the puzzle she hadn't yet discovered. The first luminous store opening was just 2 weeks away, and Sarah's days had become a whirlwind of activity. The community engagement aspect of the Riverside Heights project had taken on a life of its own, with former residents reaching out daily to share stories and photographs of the old neighborhood. Marina's Artisan Collective had become a symbol of the project's commitment to local talent, with their stunning light fixtures featured in several design magazines. But not everyone was celebrating. Sarah's daughter Emily burst into her home office one evening, her face pale with concern. "Mom, you need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a social media post from Karen, Sarah's former manager. It included a grainy photo of Sarah and Robert Sterling having coffee at an outdoor cafe, with a suggestive caption implying their relationship was more than professional. The post had already gathered hundreds of comments, many from local business people questioning the legitimacy of Sarah's rapid rise at Milestone. "It's nothing," Sarah said firmly, though her hands shook slightly as she handed the phone back to Emily. "People will always talk." "But Mom, there's more." Emily scrolled to another post, this one featuring scanned documents with certain sections highlighted. Karen's saying she has proof of financial irregularities at Milestone, and she's threatening to take it public before the store opening. Sarah's mind raced. The documents in the photo looked like internal financial reports, the kind she'd been reviewing for the store launch. How had Karen gotten access to them? Her phone buzzed with a text from Theodore. "Emergency meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. Bring all launch documentation." That night, as Sarah gathered her files, she heard voices from Tommy's room. Pushing the door open slightly, she found him video chatting with someone whose voice she recognized, Marina's teenage son, Luis. They were excitedly discussing ideas for a digital archive of Riverside Heights memories, with Tommy showing off a website mock-up he'd created. "Mom!" Tommy called out when he noticed her. "Luis and I had this idea. What if we created an interactive timeline of Riverside Heights? People could upload their old photos and stories, and we could link it to the new development plans." Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. Her son, who had been so distant just weeks ago, was now actively engaged in the project that had changed their lives. He'd found his own way to contribute, using his tech skills to help preserve the community's history. The next morning's meeting was tense. Theodore paced the conference room while Robert Sterling sat quietly, reviewing the documents Sarah had brought. James Chen stood by the window, his usual stoic expression replaced by obvious concern. "These accusations could derail everything," Theodore said. "The store opening, the Riverside Heights project, it all hinges on public trust." "What I don't understand," Sarah interjected, "is how Karen got access to these documents. They're internal reports." "That's not the only concern," James finally spoke. "We've detected unauthorized access to our servers. Someone's been gathering information about the Riverside Heights property acquisitions." Robert Sterling looked up from the papers. "Sarah, there's something you should know. The reason I've had James keeping such close watch. We've suspected for some time that someone has been trying to sabotage the Riverside Heights project. Someone who profited from the original improper land deals and stands to lose everything if we proceed with our plans for restoration." Sarah thought back to Karen's strange behavior over the years. Her sudden promotion to manager shortly after the flood, her aggressive resistance to any mentions of Riverside Heights, her inexplicable ability to afford designer clothes on her retail salary. Karen was involved in the original land grab, wasn't she? Sarah asked quietly. That's why she's so desperate to discredit the project. Robert nodded slowly. We believe she was a minor player in a larger scheme, but she may have retained documents that could complicate our efforts to restore property to the original owners. Then we need to beat her at her own game, Sarah said, an idea forming in her mind. The store opening isn't just about launching a luxury boutique anymore. It's our chance to show everyone exactly what Milestone Enterprises stands for. She pulled out her phone and called Marina. Remember how we discussed featuring local artists at the opening? I think it's time to think bigger, much bigger. As Sarah outlined her plan, she saw hope returning to her colleagues' faces. But even as they began to work out the details, she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had one more card left to play, one that could change everything. The week before the store opening transformed the luminous boutique into a hub of frenetic activity. Marina's artisans worked through the nights, installing their magnificent light fixtures that seemed to tell the story of Riverside Heights through illumination and shadow. Local artists, many with connections to the old community, created window displays that blended luxury fashion with historical photographs and artifacts. Tommy and Luis had launched their digital archive project, projecting images of the old town square onto screens cleverly integrated into the store's design. The website they created had gone viral, with hundreds of former residents contributing their memories and photographs. Emily, inspired by the project's momentum, had convinced her college application committee to let her write about community restoration instead of her original essay topic. She spent her evenings helping Sarah organize the growing collection of stories and documents that people were bringing forward. "Ms. Matthews," Sarah turned to find a young intern holding out a tablet. "You need to see this. Karen just posted." Again. The new post was different from the others, less aggressive, more calculated. It included a photograph of what appeared to be a contract, dated just after the flood, with signatures that made Sarah's blood run cold. One was Karen's, the other belonged to James Chen. "I can explain," James's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to find him standing in the doorway, his usual composure cracked. "I was a different person then. I worked for the development company that acquired the properties. That's why Mr. Sterling hired me years later, to help make things right." Sarah studied his face, seeing for the first time the weight of guilt he'd been carrying. "That's why you've been watching me so closely. You were protecting the project, trying to prevent history from repeating itself." James nodded slowly. "Karen knows I switched sides. She's been threatening to expose my past involvement unless I help her discredit you and the project." "Then let's expose it ourselves," Sarah said firmly. "At the opening, complete transparency. Isn't that what we promised?" The next morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting with Robert Sterling and the entire team. As she outlined her revised plan for the opening, she could see uncertainty warring with hope on their faces. "It's risky," Theodore warned, "using the launch of a luxury brand to publicly address past wrongs. It's unprecedented." "So is everything else we've done," Sarah countered. "The artisan collaboration, the community integration, none of this fits the usual luxury retail model. But that's exactly why it's working. People are hungry for authenticity, for businesses that do more than just sell products." Robert Sterling had been quietly listening, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally he spoke. "Sarah's right. Luminous was never meant to be just another boutique chain. It's about illuminating possibilities, in fashion, in business, and in community." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Sarah worked with James to document everything: the original land deals, the process of tracking down displaced families, the plans for restoration. Marina's team created a special installation piece that would serve as the centerpiece of the revelation, a magnificent chandelier incorporating elements from both the past and future of Riverside Heights. Tommy and Luis expanded their digital archive into an interactive exhibition that would run alongside the store's luxury displays. Emily helped craft the narrative that would explain how a simple act of kindness in a mall boutique had snowballed into a movement for community restoration. The night before the opening, Sarah stood alone in the completed store, surrounded by the subtle glow of Marina's light fixtures. The space somehow managed to feel both luxurious and welcoming, high-end and accessible. Through the windows, she could see Karen across the street, watching the final preparations with an unreadable expression. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Ready for tomorrow?" She looked around at what they had created, not just a store but a bridge between past and future, between luxury and community, between profit and purpose. Her reply was simple: "More than ready." But as she gathered her things to leave, Sarah noticed a manila envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a single photograph that made her realize tomorrow's revelation might be even more dramatic than she had planned. The morning of the Luminous store opening dawned clear and bright. Sarah arrived early, the mysterious photograph from the previous night safely tucked in her briefcase. She hadn't shown it to anyone yet, the image of a young Robert Sterling, shaking hands with Karen's father at what appeared to be a property signing, was too explosive to share without understanding its full context. The store was already buzzing with activity. Marina's team was making final adjustments to the lighting, each fixture casting intricate shadows that danced across the walls like memories coming to life. Tommy and Luis were running final checks on their digital displays, which would tell the story of Riverside Heights through a carefully curated collection of photographs and testimonials. "Mom!" Emily called out, hurrying across the floor with a garment bag. "The dress just arrived from the designer. She says it's perfect for tonight's presentation." Sarah unzipped the bag to reveal a stunning creation that somehow captured both the elegance of Luminous and the spirit of Riverside Heights. The fabric's pattern subtly incorporated elements from the Old Town Square's architecture, while the silhouette was thoroughly modern. As the morning progressed, more surprises arrived. Former residents of Riverside Heights began showing up with additional photographs, documents, and stories. Each person who walked through the door added another piece to the complex puzzle of community history that the store's design now celebrated. "Sarah?" Robert Sterling's voice made her turn. He stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, but there was something different about his expression. "I believe we need to talk before tonight's event." She followed him to the store's private consultation room, designed for VIP clients, but now serving a very different purpose. Before she could mention the photograph, Robert began speaking. "I owe you the complete truth," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "The photograph you received last night, I know about it because I'm the one who had it delivered." Sarah sat down slowly, her mind racing. "You knew Karen's father." "He was more than just someone I knew." Robert's hands clasped, together tightly. "He was my mentor, the man who taught me everything about real estate development, and he was the one who showed me how devastating unchecked development could be to communities like Riverside Heights." The story poured out. How Robert had witnessed firsthand the manipulation of property rights after the flood, how Karen's father had eventually revealed the extent of the damage they'd caused, and how his last request before retiring was for Robert to find a way to make things right. Everything, the job offer, the store concept, the community restoration project, it's all been part of a promise I made to him, Robert explained. But I needed someone with genuine connections to the community to help lead it. When I saw your name on the employee records at the mall, I knew it was time to act. Sarah listened, pieces falling into place. "And Karen? Does she know about her father's change of heart?" "No. She only knows the father who taught her to protect their interests at all costs. That's why she's so desperate to stop us. She thinks she's protecting his legacy." A knock at the door interrupted them. Theodore entered, his face grave. "Karen's here. She's demanding to speak to both of you before the opening ceremony." Sarah glanced at her phone. Hundreds of guests would be arriving in just a few hours. The media was already setting up outside, attracted by the unique combination of luxury retail and community restoration that Luminous promised. "Let her in," Sarah said firmly. "It's time everyone heard the whole truth." Karen strode in, her designer outfit a sharp contrast to the anxiety in her eyes. In her hands, she clutched a folder of documents. "I'm giving you one last chance to cancel this opening," she announced, "or I release everything. The original property deals, James's involvement, all of it." "Karen," Robert said gently, "there's something you need to see first." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a letter, the paper yellowed with age. "Your father wrote this before he retired. I think it's time you knew what really happened after the flood." As Karen began to read, her hands trembling slightly, Sarah looked out the consultation room's window at the store they'd created. The afternoon sun was catching Marina's light fixtures just right, creating a kaleidoscope of shadows and light that seemed to bring the whole space alive with possibility. The letter changed everything. As Karen read her father's words, his confession of guilt, his deep regret over the displacement of families, and his final wish for restoration, tears began rolling down her cheeks. The carefully constructed anger she'd been holding onto for years crumbled in the face of truth. "He never told me," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "All these years I thought I was protecting his reputation." Sarah moved to sit beside her former manager, seeing her not as an enemy now, but as someone else whose life had been shaped by the events of that devastating flood. "It's not too late to be part of making things right," she said softly. Outside, the consultation room the store was filling with invited guests. Through the window, Sarah could see Marina directing the final lighting adjustments, while Tommy and Luis helped elderly former residents navigate the digital displays of their shared history. Emily was greeting media representatives, confidently explaining the unique concept behind Luminous. "The opening ceremony starts in an hour," Theodore reminded them gently. "What do you want to do?" Karen looked up from the letter, her expression transformed. "I want to tell the truth, all of it, including my part in trying to stop this project." She turned to Sarah. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. As guests filled the store, they were greeted by an extraordinary sight. Luxury fashion displays seamlessly integrated with historical photographs and artifacts, all illuminated by Marina's magnificent light fixtures that seemed to bridge past and present. At precisely 7 o'clock, Robert Sterling stepped up to the podium. The crowd fell silent as he began to speak, not about profit margins or market expansion, but about community, redemption, and the power of simple acts of kindness. Then he introduced Sarah, who took the stage wearing the specially designed dress that captured the spirit of their project. She shared her story, not just of her recent rise from sales associate to executive, but of her childhood in Riverside Heights, the impact of the flood, and the unexpected way her past and present had converged. "Luminous isn't just a store," she explained to the captivated audience. "It's a statement about what business can be when we prioritize community alongside commerce. Every piece in our collection, every fixture in our design, tells a story of collaboration and restoration." But the most powerful moment came when Karen asked to speak. Standing before the crowd, she revealed her own journey from defender of past wrongs to advocate for restoration. Her testimony added the final piece to a story of transformation that left hardly a dry eye in the house. The evening culminated with a dramatic lighting ceremony. As Marina's centerpiece chandelier illuminated, its intricate design casting shadows that recreated the silhouette of the old Riverside Heights town square, Tommy and Luis launched their digital archive website live on the store's screens. Watching the celebrations, Sarah felt a gentle tug on her sleeve. It was Emily holding her phone with a trembling smile. "Mom, you need to see this. The story's gone viral. People all over the country are sharing it, talking about their own lost communities and the possibility of restoration." Robert joined them, beaming with pride. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Luminous was never meant to be just one store. It's a model for how business can help heal communities, and thanks to you, Sarah, we've proven it works." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing in the center of the store, surrounded by the gentle glow of Marina's lights. Her children were nearby, Tommy excitedly explaining the website features to a group of journalists, while Emily discussed internship possibilities with Theodore. In that moment, Sarah realized that the true luxury they were offering wasn't in the clothing or accessories that filled the store. It was in the connections rebuilt, the wrongs righted, and the communities restored. Her simple act of kindness to a stranger had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. And as she watched Karen and Robert discussing plans for future community restoration projects, Sarah knew that their story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. 6 months had passed since the dramatic opening of the first Luminous store, and the impact had exceeded everyone's expectations. What started as a luxury boutique had evolved into a movement, with each new store opening becoming a catalyst for community restoration in different cities. Sarah sat in her expanded office at Milestone Enterprises, reviewing plans for their latest project. The wall behind her desk was covered with framed magazine covers featuring the Luminous story, not just fashion magazines, but business publications celebrating their innovative approach to corporate responsibility. "Mom!" Tommy burst into view, the office laptop in hand. You won't believe what just happened. The Riverside Heights Digital Archive project won the National Youth Innovation Award. They want Luis and me to present at the ceremony next month. Sarah beamed with pride. Her son, once withdrawn and resentful of her new career, had found his own path to success. The digital archive had grown into a comprehensive platform that communities across the country were now using to preserve their own histories. That's wonderful, honey. Have you told Marina? Sarah asked, knowing how close Tommy had grown to Luis's family. She already knows. She's designing special lighting installations for the award ceremony. Oh, and Emily called earlier. She got the summer internship. With the Community Restoration Division. The mention of the division brought a smile to Sarah's face. It was a new department within Milestone Enterprises, created specifically to handle the unexpected demand from other communities seeking to replicate the Riverside Heights model, and it had come about in the most surprising way. A knock at her. A door revealed Karen, who had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. After the revelation about her father's true wishes, she had channeled her business acumen into leading the Community Restoration Division, working tirelessly to identify and help other displaced communities. The proposals for the next 3 locations are ready for review, Karen said, placing a tablet on Sarah's desk. And you won't believe who reached out to us, the mayor of Millbrook Valley. They had a similar situation with displaced families after an economic downturn. Sarah scrolled through the proposals, noting how each one incorporated elements of their successful model: partnership with local artisans, preservation of community history, and integration of luxury retail with social responsibility. Have you shown these to Robert yet? Sarah asked, impressed by the detailed planning. He's actually in a meeting with Marina right now, Karen replied. Her artisan collective has grown so much that they're discussing creating a dedicated training academy. The demand for their work has exploded since the stores opened. Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking about how far they'd all come. The original light fixtures that had seemed like such a crisis during the first store opening were now one of their most distinctive features, with Marina's designs becoming as sought after as the fashion they illuminated. Oh, and there's one more thing, Karen added, her expression softening. The community center in Riverside Heights is ready for its grand opening next week. They want you to do the honors. The community center had been Sarah's pet project, built on a portion of the restored Parker family land. It housed workshops for local artisans, a technology lab for youth programs, and a museum dedicated to preserving the area's history. But most importantly, it had become a symbol of how communities could heal and rebuild without losing their identity. As Karen left the office, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Robert Sterling. Emergency meeting in 1 hour, bring everyone. Big news. The tone was cryptic, but Sarah had learned to trust Robert's surprises. She began gathering her team, including Tommy, who was now a regular consultant for their digital initiatives. Whatever Robert had planned, she knew it would align with the principles that had guided them from the beginning: kindness, restoration, and the belief that success meant nothing if it didn't lift others up along the way. Looking out her office window at the city skyline, Sarah could see the illuminated sign of the original luminous store shining in the distance. It served as a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest gestures of kindness. The conference room at Milestone Enterprises buzzed with anticipation as Sarah and her team gathered for Robert's mysterious meeting. The space had been transformed since her first visit 6 months ago. Marina's signature lighting cast a warm glow over walls now adorned with photographs documenting their journey. Robert Sterling stood at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor tinged with excitement. "Thank you all for coming," he began, looking around at the faces that had become more like family than colleagues. "I've just returned from a meeting with the Global Community Development Council, and I have an announcement to make." He paused, building suspense in his characteristic way. "They've selected our luminous model as a template for their worldwide community restoration initiative. They want us to help implement similar projects in communities across the globe." The room erupted in excited chatter, but Robert held up his hand. "That's not all. The expansion will require new leadership, as I'll be focusing on the international aspects of the project, which is why I'm appointing Sarah as the new CEO of Milestone Enterprises. Sarah felt the room spin slightly. CEO, she looked around at her team, at Tommy and Luis, whose technical innovation had revolutionized how they preserved community histories, at Emily, whose fresh perspective had helped bridge generations, at Marina, whose artistry had literally illuminated their path, and at Karen, whose transformation had proved that change was always possible. She began, but Robert wasn't finished. The Luminous stores were never just about selling luxury goods, he continued. They were about illuminating possibilities, showing that business could be a force for healing and restoration. Sarah, you understood that instinctively from the beginning. Your leadership is what turned a simple store opening into a movement. As the reality of the moment sank in, Sarah thought back to that evening 6 months ago, when a stranger had walked into her store needing help. She remembered the simple decision to show kindness, not knowing it would lead to this moment. I accept, she said finally, her voice firm, but on one condition, that we never forget how this all started, that we keep kindness at the heart of everything we do. Robert smiled, pulling out an old worn business card. The one you gave me that night along with the bus fare, he explained. I've kept it as a reminder that the greatest ventures often start with the smallest gestures. The meeting evolved into an impromptu celebration, with Theodore opening a bottle of champagne he'd apparently had ready for the occasion. As Sarah watched her family, sharing their hopes for the future, she felt a profound sense of completion. Tommy and Luis were already sketching out ideas for a global version of their digital archive. Emily was discussing educational outreach programs with Karen, while Marina described her vision for an international artisan exchange program. Later that evening, Sarah stood in the original Luminous store after hours, just as she had done so many nights before. But now, looking at her reflection in the window, she saw more than just a single mother trying to make ends meet. She saw someone who had helped prove that success and compassion could go hand in hand, that luxury could have meaning beyond exclusivity, and that communities could be rebuilt without losing their soul. The store's lights dimmed automatically, leaving only the gentle glow of Marina's signature chandelier. In its light, Sarah could almost see the shapes of the old Riverside Heights town square, not as a ghost of the past, but as a blueprint for the future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Ready for tomorrow?" Sarah smiled, thinking, of all the communities waiting to be restored, all the stories waiting to be illuminated. Her reply was the same as it had been at the beginning of this journey, more than ready. And as she finally turned to leave, Sarah knew that while her story had reached a milestone, it was far from over. It would live on in every restored community, every illuminated space, and every act of kindness that sparked its own chain of transformation. The end. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah's journey has touched your hearts and shown you the extraordinary power of simple acts of kindness. This story of transformation, community, and hope is just one of many we bring to you each day. If you've been moved by the light that shines through the darkness, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Share your own stories of community and kindness in the comments below, because every story of hope illuminates the path for others. Join us tomorrow for another tale that reminds us that the greatest changes often begin with the smallest gestures. Stay tuned and let your own light shine.